I'm just super pleased that all of these guys have given up their time to come and join us for the session today. I think this is one of the most important sessions actually on the agenda today. We're really concerned about a lot of the barriers that we know are in place for people from Black and Asian communities particularly, that are very real. People are talking to us a lot about in terms of accessing treatment particularly, but also wider support. And I'm just very grateful that these guys have said that they're happy to have a really open, frank, and just real discussion about those barriers, but also about some of the kind of ways that perhaps we all, kind of us as an organisation, but as a wider community, some of the things that we can do to kind of tackle some of those barriers as well. So the panel, so Pav and Sean and Biyi and Dr. Gazelle-Jones have kind of said that they're really open to having a real proper frank discussion, and they're very open to kind of taking your questions as the panel goes on today. So you can do that by putting questions on Slido, which I think Dr. Jones is going to kind of have a look at and kind of facilitate that and drop those questions into the discussion. I'm not actually going to introduce everybody. That's not just me being really rude. I think they're going to kind of introduce themselves as the conversation goes on. So should we just give them a huge, huge round of applause and just make them really welcome? Thank you, guys.
So we're just going to start off with introductions.
Shall I start?
Yeah.
That was loud. Gosh, sorry. Hi everyone, my name's Pav. I have trichotillomania, which is a type of body-focused repetitive behaviour. It's a compulsive hair-pulling disorder. Sorry. Hopefully that's okay. It's classified as an obsessive-compulsive related disorder, and why is my mic going weird? Sorry about that. Oh, okay. So I guess for me, the difficulties that I've had growing up with trich is culturally, I grew up in quite a strict religious household, and we're not supposed to cut our hair. Hair is like a symbolic, sacred thing, and therefore I had a lot of religious guilt, a lot of shame growing up. I found it hard to say that I actually pull my hair out, so I was in denial for many, many years. There was a lot of stigma attached to what I do because culturally and religiously, you know, you're not supposed to do it. I struggled for many, many, many years until I finally admitted to myself and to other people that I had this problem. And yeah, just the guilt and the shame has been a huge thing for me. I've struggled to kind of access treatment with somebody that actually understands my culture and community. But it's led me to do what I do today. So I'm a trainee psychotherapist. I study at Birkbeck, which is just around the corner, to become the help that I needed when I was younger. And I think it's really important to have more representation of people of colour who are clinicians. So yeah, that's basically why I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sorry about my mic issues. It's your fault.
You want to go next?
Yes.
Oh, you guys can hear me perfectly, right? Yeah, so my name's Sean Flores. I'm someone who's lived with OCD for probably about, undiagnosed maybe about 4 or 5 years, and I would say diagnosed now for about a year. My whole motto with OCD is, OCD was the worst thing to ever happen to me, and I'm determined to be the worst thing to ever happen to OCD. So that's copyrighted. You listen, it's copyrighted. But yeah, no, a lot of my journey was So the way I grew up, again, very similar to Pav, in a very religious household, conservative, Christian, Caribbean. And for years I grew up believing that having certain kind of thoughts made you the kind of person that you are. And there's a famous Proverbs in the Bible which is, as a man thinketh, so is he. And again, I've remixed it to, as a man thinketh, so is he, but not according to my OCD. So for such a long time, it started off with health anxiety. When it started off with health anxiety, I would obsessively go to the clinic, convinced I had HIV, convinced I had chlamydia, convinced I had every STI known to the world. I'd cancel all my plans in the day. And I thought what I was doing was just normal behavior. I thought I was being a due diligent citizen in society, until I realized everything that I did came with a sort of action that I couldn't sit with the distress. Then it moved on to the idea that I woke up one day believing I suddenly had become gay overnight, and my entire identity came crashing down. I threw up. I was also in the modeling industry at the time. When I was modeling, I was going through an eating disorder, or disordered eating, and I think I use that term to be careful to those who are diagnosed with an eating disorder and to be respectful. But I would starve myself. I drank 4 liters of water on mornings, took diuretics. I just did what I thought was, again, normal behavior, until I looked back and I realized it wasn't normal. And then after that, I was with one of my female friends, and there's the intrusive words, trigger warning, but surrounding rape, that popped into my head. And the panic attack I had was probably the biggest I ever had in my entire life. And I screamed at her to leave. I tried to sleep, and images of blood and suicide popped into my head. And I was convinced I was going crazy. So I said, cool, I'm going to go and see a therapist. And I started, but the therapy made me 100 times worse. We did talk therapy, and it was kind of a psychodynamic element. And I said to them, I'm convinced that I must have OCD, because I went on Google and I typed in, why am I having certain kind of thoughts, but I don't want to act on those type of thoughts. And I kept going back. I should have stopped. But then it reached a point where I started having suicide OCD. So I saw an image again of myself jumping off of a bridge, jumped in an Uber, looked at my friends dead in the eye, and I told them I no longer wanted to be here. And one of my friends was absolutely distraught, because in the friendship circles that I'm a part of, everyone knows me as the kind of guy they can come to for advice and so much more. So for the next couple of days, I didn't want to be alive. I wanted time to swallow me up. I would sit on the sofa and just be like, I'm still alive, crap. Wake up in the morning, I'm just a bit, damn, I've got another day to suffer. Like, I laugh about it now, that's how far I am, but that's where I was. And then I woke up on Saturday the 4th of June last year, and I was just like, I can't do this anymore. So I went on the internet, I called the NHS, they couldn't help me. They suggested a book to me called Break Free from OCD. But I think if anyone knows, when you're in the dire straits of OCD, you can't read anything, you can barely eat. I wasn't doing anything. So I found this therapist online called Emma Garrick, the anxiety whisperer, and she saved my life, is the only way for me to put it. There was nobody that I could speak to. And from then I was still going through really bad OCD, and then one moment I woke up convinced I was bipolar, convinced I was schizophrenic, convinced I had BPD, convinced I was hearing voices, and I just quite literally said to myself, I'm going to go and change the world. And I just wrote my story, and then I never expected my story to go as far as it did. I met Biyi through my story, I met Abby, I met a lot of other people in the crowd through my story, and that's, as I said, it's as a result of the dire hardship that OCD brought to my life. So it's an honor to be on this panel to talk about things that we can do to improve access. So thank you so much.
How's it going, everyone? My name's Adebiyi Desalu, or Biyi for short. It makes it a lot easier. I'm kind of like a veteran in the OCD game. Like, I've had it since I was about 6 years old. I know you think I'm 21, but I'm actually 38. So it's,
Come on, let them know.
So it's a long time. And the thing was, I didn't even realize where it was for like a good, I would say 10, 15 years. And it was just really with a conversation with my mum, and then just going through every type of therapy you could think of, like ERP, CBT, all different combinations of letters, like everything. So yeah, it was just, that initial journey was tough, because no one was really talking about OCD or what it was. Especially, there was no black or Asian or any people of color talking about it as well. So that made it tough, because there was no one to really relate to. But in general, it wasn't even, I was searching for people that had OCD, like celebrities or whatever, but I couldn't even find anything at that time. So that's you know, it's been a tough journey. But I would like to say like I'm on the other end of that, so I feel like I've improved a lot. It's not really like a day-to-day concern. It does knock on the door sometimes, but it's not like a day-to-day concern. But I think this conversation that we're having here is just really important, because speaking for black people, well, I don't speak for all black people, but speaking for black people, they're the most likely to get a mental health disorder, and the least likely to seek treatment. So it's so imperative that we kind of address this and find out what's going on. And it's a shame, like, thank you all for coming as well, but it's a shame that we did, you know, a lot of people spilled out, because it would be good for everyone to hear this conversation. You know? But yeah, anyway, that's it. We'll move on.
Thank you so much to the EDI panel. So I'm Ghazal Jones. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I work in the National Specialist Service at the Maudsley Hospital for Young People. And I am here today, I guess, a clinical psychologist from a diverse background, Pakistani, but born and raised in Sweden. So I've had experience of, you know, being in different situations, facing different barriers to training, but also experiencing what being from different backgrounds, the kind of things they can raise in just day-to-day life, and the kind of things you might experience as a family when it comes to issues like racism, when it comes to discrimination, things like that. So I guess that experience has really made me want to understand and work on thinking about, you know, what can we do differently, just to make sure that people find it okay, feel it able to seek help for OCD, and also that they feel like that the treatment that they receive is actually taking into account the things that they value, the things that are really important to them. So that's what's led me here today. I really encourage all of you, and it's really lovely to see all of you here, to submit your questions via Slido. Tell us, you know, things that you want to know more about. Be curious. We have had a chat before we met today, and we've been really clear. We want to be open. There's nothing you can't ask. So throw any questions our way, and we will do our best to answer them. But we're really hoping that you leave with, at the end of this conversation, this dialogue today, is an understanding of what some of those barriers are, so you don't feel as alone in experiences that you may have had or share with some of us here, but also knowing that there's hope and that there is treatment out there that can help, and maybe this can help you advocate for yourself if you are receiving that treatment. So having said that, I am going to open up to questions. So that's what I'm doing here. Sorry, I'm not texting. So no questions. So what I am going to do, there's a question. Oh, yes, brilliant. Okay, I've seen 2 come through. So question we've had is, have you told your family that you have OCD? If so, what did they say? So this is open to anyone to take.
You go first.
Yeah, I didn't know where it was, as I kind of mentioned in the introduction. So I didn't know where it was at first. I went through everything. I thought I had social anxiety, thought I had depression. I was just confused. So I did talk to my mum, and actually my mum has OCD as well, or she had OCD, and she's been through it. So when I said the symptoms to her, she understood where I was coming from. So it's lucky in that respect. But the rest of my family, no, I didn't really tell anyone. Even till recently, because my theme was homosexual OCD, or sexual orientation OCD. And obviously, you know, in certain communities, it's, you know, that can kind of look a certain way. So I was always nervous to tell anyone, do you know what I mean? But recently, I told some of my closest friends, and it felt like such a relief. And you know what? When I told them, they said, do you know what? We've had those thoughts as well. Like we've had those thoughts before. You know, so that it was almost like a weight lifted off my chest. So it is so important to talk to someone, because you always fear. I think with OCD, we overthink, but we think that there's going to be some certain judgment on us, or we're going to be seen in a certain way. But I think once you do it, it's such a relief to actually talk about it and, you know, just put it out there. So yeah.
I've had lots of kind of families or young people kind of say, you know, once I started talking about it, then you kind of learn about like relatives or people who might have struggled with anxiety or OCD. Just wondering if, that was any of your experiences or anything else that you experienced when talking to your family.
Yeah, so it was difficult growing up, I think because of the religious side of things, and obviously you could see that I had not very much hair, so like it was in the presentation, it was physical, so you could see that, so my family knew. I think one thing though that's been important for me to learn is that later, sort of like when I sort of admitted to myself that I was actually pulling my hair out, I realised it was my responsibility to let people know how I feel, and that I can't presume that other people know how I feel. So I had to kind of like be really explicit and kind of spell it out for them, because they're not going to know how I feel. They're not going to know the experiences that I'm going through. And so I kind of took ownership of that to, communicate, like learn to communicate with family members about what is happening for me, rather than them feeling hopeless and helpless as to how to help me. It's kind of seeing it from their point of view as well as my point of view. And when I feel like, you just don't understand, I also know it's my responsibility to kind of sit and have a conversation and try and make people understand. So that's one thing that I think that I learned. Sean, you go.
Well, I think in my family, mental illness is something we don't ever really speak about. So to give you some context, my dad died on Christmas Day when I was 6, and I look back and now I understand my mum went through a crisis. So my mum went through severe months of depression, lots of anxiety, and ever since my dad, she was never the same. Panic attacks. And a lot of my mum's behaviour, not to out my mum, but it's not normal. And I thought my mum's behaviour was normal growing up, so worried about me, almost on the verge of a panic attack all the time, nervous breakdowns. So when I shared my story, I didn't share it directly with my family, but I had like a broadcast, so I sent it out to the family. And when my mum came back home from Trinidad during the COVID period, when she overheard me on podcasts talking about OCD, there was a time when she actually said to me, I never knew that's what OCD was about. And I said, yes, Mum, these are the kind of thoughts that I had. I said, I thought I was gay, and so much more. So then my mum asked me, why did I believe what I believed in? Well, I said, well, it's the way that you raised me. I grew up in a very conservative church where homosexuality was wrong. Anything, drugs was wrong. Alcohol, everything was you weren't allowed to do it, or you couldn't be a certain kind of way. And again, to be open and very honest with you, when I was around 10, in school, in sex education, they asked me, what did I think of people who were gay? And apparently my response at 10 and 11 was, I believe gay people should be put onto an island so they don't spread the disease. That's the way that I was raised. That was the kind of beliefs that I had that were indoctrinated. So when I had these thoughts that I was gay, I think a lot of it perhaps came from internalized homophobia. A lot of it came from the way the Caribbean culture, you think about songs in the Caribbean culture, and you think about the way we view homosexuality almost as this Western disease and this Western import. And those are the relics of colonialism and imperialism. So now I don't really care. I still have the thoughts. I'm friends with so many people from different walks of life. But when I told my family, I think they were really surprised as well. And my mum still to this day doesn't understand how I talk so much, because that's not the kind of way that I was raised. But I realized some of the biggest things and some of my biggest fears came from the way that I was raised, that religious dogma. And I think one of the biggest things that I've learned to understand has been where religion intersects with culture, a lot of the behaviors that the Caribbean culture have are intertwined so heavily with religion that it's so dogmatic and it prevents people from getting the help that they need. So if I had gone to my church, I'm not religious anymore, but if I'd gone to my church or gone to my family, they'd have probably prayed for me, prayed the demons away and so much more. And that doesn't do any good. If I start thinking I've got demons, I might have to go and get an exorcist until I realize there's something misfiring in my brain. And I think another thing that I don't want to go on for too long, but freedom. And what I mean by the word freedom, it's a very important word, right? Once upon a time ago, anyone who was had a different way of thinking. Even if you think about Jamaica, I'm Trinidadian, but people used to wear hats called dunce if you had any neurodivergent way of thinking or you weren't the best in schools. I think a lot of people in the culture I'm from won't talk about mental health because they're afraid of having their freedom impinged upon. And what I mean by that is, you speak about your mental health, you could lose your job, so you lose the way to look after your family, you lose routine, everyone looks down upon you. And in a culture where family is so important, and in a culture where family is almost like a safety net against the government, talking about that, ending up in a mental institution, ending up on antidepressants, is almost a failure on your culture. And this is why I say the cultural manifestations of OCD, especially in ethnic minority communities, are far graver than what I've seen in other communities, for sure.
Thank you so much, Sean. I think it's so interesting, like this fits in a lot with the kind of what you're saying, fits in with the research out there as well, is like that, the barriers can be within kind of family culture, whether it's, protective things like family history where you can talk openly about this, or there isn't that, and then there's the kind of broader issue of like the wider community as well. So not only are you just thinking about what's the impact going to be on my family, that if I share this information, you're thinking about your relationship to the community. What about, their friends of my mom or my grandparents? If other people find out I've got OCD, how are they going to respond? How are they going to experience that kind of almost indirect kind of discrimination in some way? And that has definitely been flagged as a barrier out there. So thank you so much for sharing that. We've just been flagged that maybe our mics are kind of rubbing against our clothes, so we might just check that that's happening. But just kind of tell us if you're struggling to hear us at all. So the other question we've had is, have you experienced racism in accessing treatment?
I think it is about what type of racism. So there may be subtle forms of racism or microaggressions, systemic racism, for example, institutional racism. I think I am, as someone who's a trainee now, I think that within where I'm learning at, like with peers and colleagues, it's not so much like racism with a big R, if you know what I mean, but it's the subtle, small, almost insidious sort of systemic racism, I think was what I'm trying to get at. The fact that there's not much representation when you're trying to access treatment. There's not many black or Asian or people of colour who are therapists. The fact that, it's hard for people to fund going to university when they're from poorer backgrounds, that there is levelling up going on, and, there is efforts being made, but I still feel that with colleagues, my friends, my peers, even people that I train with, it is difficult. It's difficult it's difficult to be heard, I think. It's difficult to create a conversation like this, because the forums don't exist yet, very much, I think. In terms of accessing treatment, again, it's not racism with a big R, it's the lack, what's not said, rather than direct racism. That's my experience. I don't know about you guys.
I think for me personally, coming from the perspective of seeking treatment, I can't say that I've experienced like any kind of direct racism as such, in terms of like, I'm not even sure what that would look like. So as in, would I be denied treatment, or would there be a barrier there that's racist? I don't know. I haven't experienced. I can't say that I've experienced that. But I think one thing that is an issue is that there's the perception of racism within therapy, and like as in, like if you're a black or Asian person and you might, let's say you're part of the church or something like that, you may not trust, as Sean kind of mentioned, you may not trust like modern health or Western health, and I think I think the barrier is more there, where there needs to be that trust built up, and that can be built up with having conversations like this, And also, as Pav mentioned, there's not many black therapists or Asian therapists. So it can look like, it can kind of foster that distrust for the medical establishment. But I think that's something that has to be broken down, because for us to receive treatment, for everyone to receive treatment, we need to have a different outlook on racism within that. And it comes from both sides. Like, it comes from from the therapy side and from our side as well. And that's just to give a different kind of perspective on it.
Topics of racism make people feel very uncomfortable. You can already feel how flat the room is and how silent the room has gone. And that tells you a lot about where we are in the world. I think Biyi makes some very good points. There's a lot of distrust in the community, and again, to give people some context, but if you think about America and you think when Uncle Sam sneezes, the world catches a cold, and that's nowhere better than Britain. Britain follows pretty much everything of what America does. Black History Month started in America. 11 years later, we had it in the UK. You think about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, where they injected 400 African American males with syphilis, and they could have treated them, but they chose not to treat them. They chose to let them go to the end of their life. And then they found somehow the cure, but they had it a long time ago. And I think that's just one example. You think about Henrietta Lacks and the immortal cell line, the HeLa cell line, that's contributed to a massive amount of studies. And a lot of people in America have a massive distrust for the medical system for justifiable reasons and so much more. And I think in the UK, we've imported a lot of those attitudes. But then to give you more context, you think about how, unfortunately, a lot of black women, when they're pregnant, they're less likely to receive help and painkillers because they're seen as a superwoman. And in America, again, the idea that the African-American population is known to be the hidden population of OCD. Why they don't access treatment is many different reasons. You've got therapy, you've got the community, but distrust is at the heart of it all. If you don't believe a system is engineered and set up to help you, be the best version of yourself, you're not going to interact with that. And I think that the biggest entry point we can see is either through people speaking about mental health, having therapists and people who look like us. So when people have reached out to me on the internet, again, a lot of black people from all across the world, some people have just quite literally said they've never seen anyone black with OCD. And again, when you look at the studies, it shows that black people with OCD are more likely to be misdiagnosed as psychotic because they present with OCD symptoms that are very different compared to the demographic of which we have studied. And that tells you a lot. So, for example, some of my compulsions were, I'll check the door several times, I'll turn the cooker off several times, because growing up in my head, you leave gas on, you blow the house up. You don't close the door, someone's going to come in. And so much more. So that's the way a lot of it presented for me. I'm not saying that's uncommon in every other experience, but I definitely think at the heart of it, I haven't experienced racism. My therapist was a white Scottish lady, and the charity I saw before that was actually a black charity that made my OCD worse. So I'm quite lucky in the sense of I personally don't think I've experienced racism, but I've seen how racism at institutional level does affect people for sure.
Yeah. Can go on the topic. Like as Sean's saying, like the distrust is definitely valid. Like it comes from somewhere. It's not from nowhere. But where we need to go to push it forward is like, how can we break down that barrier? Do you know what I mean? It's like, how can we, because like you said, like my therapist, actually I don't think I've ever had a black therapist, which is not surprising, but same as Sean, like my therapist, the one I was seeing for about a year, he was a white older man. And yeah, I didn't really experience, I can't say I experienced any racism. So the point is that if we can get to the stage where we can actually get into therapy, those barriers will break down. But it's just how do we solve this issue of like distrust within the medical establishment?
I think
so. There's
sorry, go on.
Did you?
No, go on.
No, I was just going to say there are like barriers, like we're talking about it, kind of various stages. First is like, really just even understanding it's OCD, because whether it's kind of understood as something slightly different in your culture or whether there isn't even a name for OCD. I was asking a family yesterday, I was working through an interpreter, like, what is there a name for OCD in your culture? What does that mean? How is it understood? If there isn't a kind of framework to even kind of highlight what that even looks like, how do you talk about it? there isn't a language around that. So there's that initial barrier of, how do I understand this? Is this normal? Isn't it? How does it fit with my religion? Is it excessive? Is it not? And then it moves on to kind of maybe understanding and being able to do that research or having helpful conversation with families. But then if you rely on clinicians to be able to say, look, I think this might be OCD, or this is what you need. And people do experience lots of barriers at that stage, whether it's like if I go in and I share that I'm having aggressive, sexual, violent thoughts, and, and I'm also maybe at high risk of being admitted because I'm from a black ethnicity. Do I tell people? Or should I just not share that information? Because maybe I'm going to be at risk of being hospitalized or things like that. And then once you get into treatment, then it's all about, okay, what is now the clinician? I think it's a lot about responsibility of clinicians as well. When you get to that stage, it's up to us to say, okay, how am I going to learn about whatever culture I'm supporting, religion, presentation, to make sure that I've got the right supervision, I've got the right knowledge to be able to answer some of these questions and to really help this young person, adult, understand what's maintaining their OCD, and do that within your values. I think where we get lost as clinicians sometimes is like, we've got this manual, we've got to follow it, we know this is the content, but we struggle to kind of figure out how do we shape it to make it meaningful. I think that is a two-way street. So unless we bring that, there's a risk of clinicians also kind of devaluing some of those really important experiences of racism or inaccessibility or family experiences that people are bringing and that have affected their OCD. We've got about sort of just under 10 minutes. And
Sorry, I just wanted to really quickly carry on from what you were saying, was that I think what you're saying is that it's really important to be seen as a whole individual and not just OCD. So things like, gender, race, age, sexuality, sexual orientation, culture, all these things should be coming into the therapy room or should be looked at, and not just the fact that you have OCD or TRIC. But I do find that the way that clinicians are taught is based on it's all Western practice. Like the gold standard is derived from Western medicine, and sometimes there isn't enough training around diversity and looking at the patient as a whole. It's just kind of sometimes a narrow view. I just wanted to reinforce what you were saying, is that as a person who, when I go and seek treatment, I want somebody to listen to me and ask me, how was that for you? Like, what were your experiences, that I can then educate somebody, if it's whoever it is that's listening to me, so that my voice can be heard, so that I can feel validated, so I can feel seen, without that other person having preconceptions, without them having an unconscious bias, without them presuming. I think that is what good treatment is. If we could all have that, that would be good.
I think this links to some of the questions that are coming in about treatment, like how do you help patients with religious OCD in regards to Islam? Do therapists know how to do that work? And what has been helpful treatment? And I think it's about, as clinicians, being able to acknowledge that we're not going to have all the answers, and so equally, like, people we're treating are not going to have all the answers, and some of that is figuring that out together. But that can be a really difficult position to be in sometimes, because I think people might be turning to us as clinicians of like, you know the answers, can you fix this, can you solve this? And it's down to us to say, look, this is what I'm good at, I know how OCD works, how it comes together, but I've never met anyone from a Muslim background or haven't worked closely with them, and being really open and honest upfront about that, and that curiosity and that dialogue together can shape that experience. So in terms of, what has been your experience of good treatment, or anything kind of...
No, I was just going to say, like, your relationship with a therapist, it could be the same as a relationship with a friend. So if you have a friend from a different culture that you know nothing about, obviously you're going to work together to try and understand their culture, and they're going to work together with you to understand your culture. So it's the same with a therapist. Like, you can't expect a therapist just to have an understanding of every culture automatically, and they have to work and tailor what they're doing to the individual, as Pav said. So it is about learning. Like, with my therapist, I had to explain different things about black culture and, Nigeria. I'm half Nigerian, half British. And I had to explain certain things, but it's normal that you would have to explain certain things to a friend. So I see it like that. I think sometimes there can be too much expectation on the therapist, I would say.
Remind me the question?
It's about what good treatment looked like for you and whether there were...
I think for me, good treatment was having a therapist who was kind to me but really cruel to the OCD. And what I mean by that is, if my therapist was too nice towards the OCD, I don't think I'd be where I am now. I think I really needed that, you know. I often, and to give you an example, I had to write a script on schizophrenia. So I believed I was hearing voices, I believed I was going absolutely mad. And as I was writing it, I was crying my eyes out. And she said, Sean, you can cry your eyes out for as long as you want to, but you need to finish it. So I finished the script, and then all I did was sleep for about 3 hours, right? And that was probably one of the best things I had ever done in my entire life. And I think very similar to what Biyi says in terms of culture, yeah, there were things I had to explain to her. I was like, there's some things I can't get away with that you can probably get away with. But I find that exciting. Like, I enjoy explaining certain things to some people, but I know not everyone feels like that. I do also think the wider culture of politics at the moment, there's a deep assumption that anybody from a different culture is automatically negative, and I don't think that does anything good for the human experience in general. I do think there are things at different levels that can be barriers, but I do also understand that what's a barrier for someone else might not be a barrier for me. And what I mean by that is there's a great example of this. I wrote an article on what it meant to be black with OCD, and I said you're no longer alone to a lot of people. And a young lady from India actually messaged me. She said, what does OCD have to do with race? She said, like, anyone can get OCD. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Anybody can get OCD. So I just sent her an article I wrote breaking down the studies. And she was like, oh, I'm so sorry. So I think even within the OCD community, it's very uncomfortable to have certain conversations. As I said, you can feel how tense and tight the room is when you have certain conversations. And then you think about the wider implications of, even if you agree with cancel culture or not, I think you look at the way cancel culture demonizes anybody to have the right thoughts, the wrong thoughts. You look at thought editing, you look at thought policing. I think in a grand scheme, that even has an even bigger part to play on top of race. So, yeah. That would be my answer.
We've had some amazing questions come in. It's proving very difficult to choose which ones to answer.
Make us answer in a really quick time.
In quick time, just go through all of them. I mean, there's a lot about, like, with sexuality, OCD, what's helped your recovery. I might throw some of these out there and we can kind of pick as they sort of feel relevant. And why some people are having to wait longer for therapy than others. Some people are waiting 3 years for therapy, and we've talked about what some of those reasons could be. And also about scrupulosity, which is religious or moral obsessions, and that seems less talked about, and how can we, due to strong culture, religious and cultural traditions. But a lot of what I'm seeing here is about what can we do differently? How can we raise that awareness? How can we, on both sides, as people going through treatment, but also people providing it.
Community outreach programs. I think community outreach programs are massively understated. And what I mean by that is, there's a term called code switch, and I can talk to you guys the way I sound normally, and I can go to a school and be like, yo, big man, listen, I got some messed up thoughts sometimes, And they're like, what, like that, yeah? And I'm like, yeah, man, I get some strange thoughts. And I get strange thoughts too. So I think having people that can speak 2 languages at once really massively helps people. And when I've gone to schools to deliver talks and so much more, there's an appetite for people to learn. But I think massively within religious communities, secular treatment has to triumph over religious dogma. And what I mean by that is dogma is so heavy, and we're raised with this idea that you need to be a good citizen. You cannot get in trouble. If you get in any sort of trouble, you're going to shame the whole family. You're going to shame everybody around you. And to be an outcast in your community, especially in the Caribbean community, it's almost, it's social suicide, I think is the best way to put it. And I think I'm really lucky that we're in the Western world, that I can go and make friends with anybody from any different community. But the way I grew up, if I told certain people I had certain kind of thoughts, I'd have been ostracized. And I know for a lot of people that's a massive, massive issue. But I think we need to target religious leaders, a lot of people with a massive amount of influence out there who do genuinely have clout, social capital and cultural capital, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, go on.
No, I agree with that 100%. I think that's the way to relieve this kind of distrust in the medical establishment as well, is going through people that people trust. You know what I mean? Like if your community leader or your church leader was educated on OCD and how to help people, they could have such a massive impact on their followers, on their congregation. So, I'm not a church guy. I'm just. But
sorry.
So it's just important to go through that channel, and I don't know exactly what it will look like, but we are working on that on the panel, OCD Action, in terms of how to reach people and how to get in touch with these community leaders and all that. And also, it's like if you have OCD and you're at a stage where you can get out there and all that as well, it would be helpful to go to your community leaders and see what can be done, see what help you can actually give. I mean, even with me, like I'm only part of this panel. Well, it's mainly because of Sean, because I just reached out to Sean. I saw another black guy on TV talking about OCD, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to give him a shout. So I messaged him on Instagram, and then that's how we met. So it's important because now we can do talks like this, and we can give this information. And yeah, I think it's important for everyone to kind of play their part in that as well. Even because there's a tendency to, like, when you recover, just to kind of just leave it and like, all right, I'm cool now, like I don't need to help anyone. But I think it's so important that we kind of look back and help others that were struggling as well. I would have loved to have someone like Sean, for example, when I was like 8 years old or 10 years old on TV talking about OCD. That could have changed my whole life, So it's very important. It's very important to do that, I think.
Gosh, it really makes me think about like different types of community outreach there is, like the kind of work that you've done, Sean, just kind of getting on TV and saying that's a kind of community outreach, and I think services and professionals can do that in a kind of slightly different way. But having done that, being part of a project where we did outreach specifically for OCD in youth, we went to schools and GP surgeries, and we went to teachers and provided all this teaching and training for free. To raise that awareness. And there was loads of things we learned. Is firstly, that doesn't happen much, and it's very new. And secondly, that actually religious communities sometimes were like, who are you? Like, back off.
Yeah, it's very insular.
Yeah, because I think they found that really threatening. Like, someone from a different religion, from a different background, coming to speak to me about OCD, that can feel really sort of unclear. And there were certain mosques or kind of churches where they were really not keen at all, and others that were open. So it's a really kind of varied experience. And just how we have that conversation day to day with people. I was trying to kind of approach people on the street or like in the libraries and just have these conversations. And it was so helpful to hear that, you could just see some of those barriers, and we've spoken about this before, kind of popping up with people being like, if you talk about it, I'm going to end up getting it. Like, it's contagious, so I can't have this conversation. And how do we break some of those kind of stigmas, how do we kind of break those myths and just kind of say, no, that's not how OCD works. And actually, the more you know about it, the more you know where to access and seek support. And part of that fear of developing and sort of thinking potentially it's not, NHS or mental health professionals aren't the people to help me here. It's religious communities can create like that huge barrier between those two things. And we know that from lots of research. People are saying, well, actually, no, I'm going to go seek help here rather than here. And I think it's our jobs as services and clinicians to say, look, you don't have to choose between the two. We will work within your community, within your system, within your religious beliefs. Part of treatment is not to say, like, your religious practices are wrong, you shouldn't be doing that, but it's helping you spot where those religious difficult, like the compulsions that you're having to do, whether it's sort of hand washing in preparation for prayer or things like that, whether it's becoming tipping into OCD, and what makes that help you notice that that's happening rather than sort of say, well, this is not something you should do at all. So I think, there's a lot to be done in terms of community outreach, and I can't speak for every profession, but in the clinical psychology world, there's certainly more of an increase and emphasis on having diverse clinicians being trained up. When I trained up, maybe there was kind of 3 of us out of 30, maybe 2. Now you're looking at, the percentage has gone up. Don't quote me on this, but maybe like to 30% like in courses now, which is feeling incredibly positive that people can have these conversations and raise some of these issues. And the most important conversation is the one we're having now, just starting that discussion rather than sort of saying this is a problem, let's just leave it hush hush, but like actually let's talk about it and like talk about what makes it difficult.
Now, can I touch on, there was a question about the waiting times.
Yes,
NHS.
there was a question about the waiting times.
So I think that's an issue as well on that side. Because like if you're seeking help and then you go to the NHS and they tell you you've got to wait 2 years or 3 years, that's a barrier in of itself. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm trying to imagine it from a young person's perspective. You don't necessarily have the money to pay for a therapist or whatever. So NHS might be your only way if you can't go through your church or through your community. So to have those type of waiting times, it's not the best, to say the least. But also that's where the community outreach can kind of come in as well. Because instead of going to, I'm not saying you shouldn't go to the NHS, you probably should, but it just gives you another option where you can have your community understand what you're going through as well. So it might be the starting point and then they might refer you to someone else. So I think, again, just to reinforce community outreach is very important. But I think we've only got a couple of minutes left.
I was going to say that I think it's important that we carry on having these conversations, and actually each one of us has a responsibility, not just us here, but as a society has a responsibility to think about how they want to use their voice and whether it's safe for them to have conversations with certain people. But the dialogue has to continue if there is going to be any sort of change. So that's really important. And it's not sometimes like, I know, Sean, you're really outspoken, and sometimes someone's may not be as outspoken as you or us being up here on stage, but in a way that maybe is comfortable for you. And that's really important, like how you want to address these issues or have these conversations around race and culture, which are difficult, but in a way that you feel safe, like with other friends, colleagues, peers, in a work setting. But yeah, I would just encourage everyone to continue thinking about these issues and what they mean to us, so that we can kind of put it out in the world and kind of not just rely on clinicians, not just rely on therapists, not just rely on the NHS, or like DEI panels or other people, is what I'm trying to say. Like we all have a responsibility, whatever age, culture, religion, all of us do as a human being. So yeah, I would really encourage everybody to be thinking about that and having those conversations, because I think those sort of micro conversations you're having, like with outreach and, combined with the outreach, they say charity starts at home, right? Conversations, even if it's just on the bus or like on the when you're in Tesco paying or something, I don't know, like anything. You know what I mean? Like that's how that's how you spread the word, and that's how the world changes.
Well, even everyone just being here, that's an amazing step anyway.
This is an amazing start, yeah.
I do think if you're going to tell your story, though, be prepared to get people out there who are going to give you hate for it. There was a young lady in Canada, I think it was, who spoke about her racist, intrusive thoughts, and just Black Asian people blasted her on the internet. And there's actually also an unwillingness to learn. There's a really big stagnant culture that does not want to learn at all. So I do think if you're going to put your story out there, be prepared for hate, be prepared for love. But most importantly, remember why you're doing what you do. I still get hate, I still get love, and well, it inspires me to be where I am today and to be able to tell you my story. But I think that's something. And I think also as well, some people feel the responsibility, like I feel the responsibility. I think you know how much I value doing what I do. But advocating for yourself on a day-to-day basis is you being an advocate for your own journey. You don't have to tell the world your story. If you want to, fantastic. But, conversations massively change lives. Absolutely, for sure. So, yeah.
And you don't have to do that alone. You've got support here. You've got OCD Action's amazing work, EDI panel, other people that you can reach out to do that work. That's concluded our talk for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. But can you just give a huge applause to these amazing people? We're around for the rest of the day, so like we said, this conversation doesn't have to stop here, so come and find us if you'd like to speak to us.
Yeah, I've not got much to say. Haven't they been wonderful? Don't you feel like they're kind of changing the world, just one conversation at a time? Yeah, they're just wonderful, aren't they? So it's... I don't really want to stop it. They are kind of amazing. So.